here. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kevin Mandia. Come on down.
Thank you. Start the timer. There we go. I don't want to do anything first. Hey, so real quick background for about a minute, and then we'll go through what has been labeled an intel briefing. I'll do the best I can for this. I'm a former Air Force guy. So I was stationed at the Pentagon in 1993 because it was my last pick. And then I got to do, at that time, computer security because it was my last pick. Tried to get out of doing computer security, so I went back to school and got a forensic science degree, and then ended up doing more cybersecurity. And finally, just sooner or later, you just embrace it and you live it. And then you realize over the last 20 years, it's become the domain where the earliest intentions of nations is most visible. So you can kind of get out in front of a lot of different things. We started responding to breaches, at least in my career, in 1995. I still remember the first breach I responded to because it was coming out of Beijing. And back then, when it came out of Beijing, it was the Chinese doing it. Okay, so now it's got a little more complex than that, and we'll have that in this intel briefing. So from 1995 till whatever the date is today, I was off like 2 months earlier, by the way. That's pretty pathetic. Looked like summer, so I thought it was July. It is what it is. The bottom line, every single day of my career, somebody at Mandiant's been responding to either Russian government, Chinese government, or organized criminals, compromising networks, and I have the privilege of representing what they learned on the front line. So everything I'm going to brief today is not secondhand. It's not something we learned reading a website somewhere. We learned this reading our forensic reports. In 2022, we opened up 1,163 investigations, and every one of these was into intrusions where they were at a scale and scope where the customer needed help. So we didn't really get to respond to the intrusions where someone got compromised. 5 minutes later, they detected it, and they started responding right away. For the most part, when we get there, there's a problem, and we got to work with intentionality for sometimes weeks or months to figure out what to do about it and move on. So I'll give you the conclusions from those 1,160 breaches. We responded in, I think it was 16 different countries. And then behind that, we have 380 threat analysts that speak 30-something languages, and they're located in 26 countries, because we do try to get attribution on every single one of these. In each breach, we encode the forensic digital evidence and do the best we can. They use YARA rules. I tried to get us to use OpenIOC because that was our idea back in 2005. As a self-funded startup, you don't get a lot of oomph behind your free ideas. But OpenIOC, we had 650 different criteria that we tried to record on every breach we respond to. So here are the conclusions. When I went through a summary of the 1,163 reports, trust me, I didn't read all of them. I read the top 11, though, and they were pretty neat. And that was fun to do. The bottom line is, first and foremost, dwell time went way down. And we've been tracking this really since 2008. The first year we ever tracked dwell time, which is the moment someone's compromised to the moment they know they were compromised. The first year we tracked that, the number was 742 days. So we're doing a lot better than that. We were 16 days of dwell time last year. And you can slice dwell time down by, was it externally detected or internally detected? Was it ransomware or was it some other kind of investigation? And then you can track it by geography, because the geography, dwell time actually went up in Europe for some reason, and it's longest in the responses that we have in Asia. But average dwell time for a ransomware case from the moment you breach and the moment you know it was 5 days in 2021. It went up to 9 days in 2022. And my theory, total conjecture, bottom line is Intel can't be wrong, so I'll just make it up on the fly. Here's what I think is happening. Somebody breaks in, somebody else does ransomware. You get a little bit more of a lag. There was a time in my career, if someone broke in and ransomware was deployed, it spoke to your defense as being maybe below a Lockheed Martin's cybersecurity program or Goldman Sachs' cybersecurity program. That's not the case anymore. Right now, I think it's pretty advanced folks breaking in and then selling the access to folks who run the ransomware. So that adds apparently a 4-day delta. That is contrary to IBM, and went out there and said, hey man, dwell time's going way down, and even in ransomware. All I can tell you, In 18% of the cases we responded to are ransomware cases, dwell time went up, for what it's worth. Second thing is incident detection. How are people knowing, learning they have a problem? In 2013, 63% of the incidents we responded to, there was external notifications. Somebody told the victim, hey, you've got a problem. And then you can do the math, the other 37% was internal. Why am I telling you 2013? Because the stats are the same 10 years later. 63% of the time, CISOs and companies are learning, at least in the incidents we responded to, that they're compromised from the outside. And that's important because there's a lot of CISOs or heads of security that get beat up by their managers when a manager says, hey, why weren't we the first to know we were breached? The reality is, outside of ransomware, most companies are not the first to know they've been breached. So who does know this? Palo Alto Networks, Fortinet, could be a government agency, could be Mandia, could be CrowdStrike. There's a whole bunch of security folks in the industry as they respond to things and see things, are learning potentially who, different victims based on telemetry. And our notification, if we see that you're a downstream victim to a breach, is just more dependable and reliable. So the dwell time, when you get third-party notification right now, has steadily gone down over the last decade. Forget what the exact number was, but we published a report, Dead Trends, that kind of shares that. A couple of the other stats as we go through it. I said ransomware was 18% of the cases. That's down from 2021. So we're just responding to less ransomware for whatever reason. When we looked at the sites and our intel folks went into looking at it, we believe there is less ransomware in the United States than in prior years in 2022. We had an insider threat stat of under 1% of our cases have an insider. We do have a skew and a bias to that. People don't hire Mandiant. They usually hire us for, we've had an intrusion, a computer intrusion. Come figure that out. And a lot of times insiders are usually detected by other insiders kind of noticing someone jamming stuff into a gym bag. But I don't think we have a valid insider threat statistic based on investigating computer intrusions. 27% of the time when we showed up to do an investigation, there was more than two groups. Well, there's more than one group. There's two or more groups that have compromised and were active on the network. That's pretty impressive if you think about it. It is, imagine when you're responding to a breach, you're like, oh, someone's doing Chinese cyber espionage on my network, and that's kind of got one motif on how you respond and how you handle it. And then you realize that there's a criminal element over here on this segment of the network as well. So 27% is up from most years. We've been higher than that, but that was back when we were small and it was easier to skew our data. A couple of things that are probably the most interesting that I thought anyway, having kind of tracked these stats since 1998, was how people broke in from 1998 to 2003 was vulnerable services, publicly available vulnerabilities. That's that simple. And you could figure out, oh, they found out how to weaponize it based on freely available exploit code. Right around 2002, you see the Spearfish start to take over as victim zero. That first compromised host was spearfished. And so from about 2002 to 2019, spearphishing leads the charge for victim zero. Suddenly it changes in 2019. It starts to change in certain geos. In 2019, we had a world record of 0 days found that year, and that's maybe why. We had 32 0 days found in the wild, and I'm like, oh my God, that's so many, because that was more than twice what we've ever seen before. When we go back to about 1998 through 2019 and look at 0 days, the mean was right about 11 0 days a year that we found in the wild being exploited. It's not very high. We shoot up to 32 in 19. There's 30 0 days in 20. And then suddenly there's 81 in 2021. And that blows away all prior records. It's like, it's basically, it's the Cal Ripken record. No one's going to break 81 0 days in a year. And then in 2022, we had 55. So what does that tell us? When we look at victim zero, it changed. 38% of the intrusions we responded to in the United States, victim zero, when we could find it, it was a vulnerability. It was exploited. And that's totally different than a 20-year run. It was spearphishing being number one, or accurate math, 17 years. So now we are all dealing with highest amount of 0 days ever. Well, the second most. And I think that's because we've all gotten better at spearphishing. And detection of it, or at least mitigating the risks involved with spearfishing. Now, that's not the same in every geo, because for whatever reason, we still have well over 100 incidents from Europe. Spearfishing is still the #1 way to have a victim zero in Europe, but everywhere else was exploit code. So looking at the 0 days, I had some interesting conclusions on this. It was, we only got attribution, and when we have a pretty high bar for attribution, we only got attribution for 16 of the 55 0 days. And that doesn't feel that good to me. So one day I'm gonna have to, back when everybody was in the office, I could run down the hall and be like, everybody get in the room, let's really figure this out. We only know 16, but we have a high bar. We know those 16. Of those 16, 13 of those 0 days were for cyber espionage purposes used by modern nations. What's interesting about that, at least from my vantage point, is right around 2015, having tracked this since the 90s, almost every time, meaning anecdotally well over 80% of the time, when we found a 0 day, the way we find those is we can't figure out how someone broke in. We're doing forensics and we're seeing connections from a host, but we don't see the access to the host. There's no telnet to it. There's no secure shell to it. There's no RDP to it. How did the attacker gain command level access to it? And then we tear apart the thing and figure out this software may be vulnerable. You do your reversing and you try to figure it out. The bottom line, when we did that, it was the 0 days were always in the hands of nations. They just were. We'd always attribute to, oh, that's the SVR, that might be the FSB. Yeah, that's someone out of North Korea, but they're wearing a uniform right now. It's Chinese cyber espionage and the MSS. It almost always went to a nation, 80, 90% of the time. But I just shared with you that 3 were criminal in the 16 that we had attribution for. So we are seeing almost as, and anecdotally, because we don't know, potentially as high as 50% of the 0 days were in the hands of hackers that are out to make money, which means 0 days are expensive, especially when you have to find 55 of them in 2022 to exploit. We saw no spray and pray 0 days in 2022, like we had in 2021, where 100,000 plus orgs are hit by the exchange 0 days. The criminals that are getting 0 days, they know they can monetize it. So I guess you can make that much money writing a 0 day or discovering a 0 day and selling it to the criminal element. And there was no spray and praise, but there was also, for the criminal element that had a 0 day, you'd expect maybe to see that spray and pray. The criminals did not do that because they recognized the value of that 0 day and targeting specific folks. Going back to the breakdown of the 0 days, 18 were against Microsoft, 10 were, I believe, Google, might have been 9 were Google, and 8, actually it's 10 were Google and 9 were Apple. And then there was like 18 others. I kind of looked at the others, and of the others, it was Sophos, Trend Micro, Citrix, Fortinet, SonicWall. It was a whole bunch of device companies. When we looked at those device companies, we found 10 0 days that to me were all security products, all on the edge, all firewalls. Of those 10, my team's opinion was 4 came straight out of China. My Kevin Mandia opinion was virtually all of them did. So in 2022, the best 0 day innovation from a nation, in my opinion, was China, period. And they were doing exploitation against the edge. They did both the Fortinet firewall 0 days that were reported last year were China. It is my belief they did the Trend Micro ones. It is my belief that the Citrix one was probably them. And you look at that, it's genius. There's no EDR running on the firewalls, period. Nobody expects to have a whole infrastructure. Even when you're on offense, that's like a holy grail. You're like, hey, I have offensive access and I'm on the firewall. You're good to go. You can access the host from that. So pretty interesting, just looking at the 0 day breakdown. In my opinion, China led the way in innovation in 0 days. We did attribute 1 to the Russian government, which to me is very small. But again, we had 39, we had no attribution for it. Then I read the forensic report. So this is probably the media intel report, and I have about 6 minutes, and I was hoping to get questions. I got sent, every year I get to just say, hey, what were the best incidents of the quarter from a new and novel techniques or just cost to the intrusion? And it came out, the last one I read this year, it had the hardest password to type in. That's why I read it last, by the way, which is sad. But once I read the thing, there was one incident we responded to that blew away the offensive innovation on all others. And it was into the American Defense Industrial Base. I'm certain that most of them are aware of this sort of technique, but it was 2 firewall 0 days against Fortinet, and that was the architecture being used. And then we attributed to the Chinese. They also had a malware framework for the ESXi servers for the VMware hypervisor. And they had a malware framework that was designed in a way where they knew the file system. It took us months to reverse the purpose of this stuff and how it works. Probably took them a year to develop it, maybe less, depends on how good their folks were. But it had the Holy Grail. You could write files to the guest image, go from guest image to guest image down the hypervisor. That's a malware framework that we blogged on it, and everybody's like, that's Mandiant nerds blogging about nerdy stuff. But it's the holy grail of what people are running right now, virtualized environments using VMware, and our adversaries have custom toolkits to access and navigate those. And then they did just the make cap command, and they just compressed a whole bunch of files and stole. I looked at that attack and went, well, how many Windows desktops got accessed? Well, nobody cared. The attacker really didn't access them in any way. We didn't even see valid credential use yet. So it'll be interesting to see even months later how much we still learn about this intrusion. But to spoil 2 0 days, period, on the same victim, and then deploy a malware framework was exceptional high cost. So again, China wins, in my opinion, on the most advancement of TTPs. And having done this since the mid 90s, every year I was like, man, I think the SVR is the best in the world on offense. I just do, besides us. But we don't respond to the United States. Nobody hires Mandia, hey, we've been hacked, come in and investigate, and it's us. We're always, up against other folks. I can tell you North Korea got better than I expected. They found a 0 day for Chrome. And when you hear of secure by design, Microsoft and Google and Apple, there's not much more we can do to secure our code. Yet it's so damn complex. There's still possibilities based on software, relying and depending on other software and other APIs and how people are going to use it. You still have challenges. But we're seeing decent 0 day capability on the client side, again, from North Korea, but they were doing almost everything just to make money, period. It was about ransomware. It was about crypto mining. And that's it. So I didn't see any wow, that's great espionage with the VMware malware framework. That's China. Russia, everybody talked about Russia in 2022 because of Ukraine. But in my opinion, having observed it, there wasn't anything really new and novel. It's probably, and I hated this because I was at RSA and I was right next to the Ukrainian cyber defense guy. And I'm like, nothing's new or novel. And he could have killed me right then, probably. But the fact is, we were looking for 0 day capabilities out of Russia during a time of conflict. They probably have them, probably 3 or 4 sitting on the shelf waiting for an op. They didn't use them in Ukraine. At least we don't see it yet. And we are doing 24/7 monitoring a bunch of orgs over there. And everybody's got their lights shining on what's happening in Ukraine to see what's going on. It's been blunt force trauma. Destroy what you can by the GRU FSB over there. So anyway, that's a long-winded intel conclusion to, for the first time in my career ever, Russia wasn't the top innovator on offense, or a criminal element wasn't. Because every once in a while, a criminal element does do a high-priced intrusion. They've sunk their teeth into somebody, and they're working around the clock to do it. China won. So I don't know what that means, but it's been an interesting year. Realize that when Mandiant does presentations, when I do presentations, all I just shared with you was the apex attacker, what they're doing. So I figure I'll leave you with a few minutes of, so what are the apex defenders doing? And it is always frustrating to hear about the 1% of the attackers out there. Not all of you are going to have a 0 day hit your company. And then you're not going to have a malware framework written just for your architecture and go do things. But what we have to do as apex defenders, and there's a lot of military folks in this room, is what I call stage 2 detection. And that's always been the game. Someone's always going to have a way to maybe get remote code execution with a 0 day, or maybe even have an insider pop something out and create a cyber intrusion for you. Whatever it is, the best stage 2 detection that we could find, and I'm not talking prevention at this point, I'm more talking how do you detect evil, is 38% of the cases we responded to where we felt China was on the offense, they used evil PowerShell scripts. it's important to know, how do you do stage 2 detection of a rogue PowerShell script? That means they have valid credentials. They're popping scripts onto boxes and they're running these scripts. So we got to figure out how to do that. And it's pretty complex. I looked at a blog that Mandia did in 2017. I think we need to update it. And we've got to find software that's really good at detecting those. And one of the things we're doing in AI right now, by the way, and one of the first quick kills we're going to have is that's a good script with high fidelity, and that's a bad PowerShell script. And then the second thing, and I wouldn't call this generative AI, it's discriminative AI. It's know what accounts should be logging on where and when. That's still the biggest bang of the buck for detection on the apex attackers. They like to use credentials because that's what we use. If they use anything else, it's an anomaly on the network to some extent. So when they break in, they are going to use credentials and getting super efficient. If you can get any kind of automation and anomaly detection on top of your Active Directory or whatever your identity architecture is, that'll go a long way. I'll stop there because I was told to allow like 10 minutes for questions, and I was hoping to get some from the folks in the room. So we got about 9 minutes, and I would like to get.
Go ahead, use the microphone, wood line, please.
Thanks.
Thanks. So what are you seeing in offensive AI? And is that having an impact?
You know, I haven't seen it, and I don't even know if we'd recognize it, but we did have a group of data scientists at Mandia years ago write a blog post and kind of look into, can we generate fake news and fake stuff with generative AI? And obviously that's going to be a real possibility. If you have a model that's all lies and you want to generate stuff out of it, you're going to get, all you have to do is change a little bit of the data set to be untrue with 99% truth, and you probably get some pretty interesting stuff. So I think a big impact will be on disinformation campaigns, really smart ones. I mean, someone will probably be able to talk to a computer and say, I want a disinformation campaign on blah. And they'll probably get one. They may have to not say the word disinformation over time as we try to put guardrails on this. But, I have a feeling there's going to be ways to do it. I don't think I've seen it materialize just yet. I still think we're in the first inning of AI and how it's going to influence both offense and defense. There's generative AI, that's content. To me, discriminative AI, we're really good at that in security already. Anomaly detection, we've trained models on, is this malware or not? We're pretty good at that stuff. So I think the old-fashioned AI, I guess they're going to call it now, we're real good at malware detection, PowerShell script detection, accounts being used in ways that they shouldn't be. So that's already there. But don't know. That's the longest answer I've ever given for I don't know. Yeah, because I don't know if we see it on offense. I don't know if we'll be able to discriminate. Oh, that's a machine doing it versus a human doing it. Yeah. So.
Hi, I'm Joshua Sinai.
Hey.
I'm a professor of practice at Princeton University in intelligence and global security studies. In identifying threat actors, how do you score them in terms of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? And do you use a risk management approach with risk, a function of threat, vulnerability, and consequence?
So on the second part, I would give you the Kevin Mandia personal answer. On how we score them in the first part, I don't know if we go tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 in any way. First one is about attribution, and there's like 17 or 18 things that contribute to attribution more than anything else. And sometimes it's just an OPSEC blunder by the offense. And a quick aside, best OPSEC improvements in the last 2 years were also China. I mean, they finally got to, if we're going to attack the United States, let's do it from IP ranges in the U.S. Russia's been doing that for 20 years. China finally started doing that. And they started deleting their log files. Going into it, in my opinion, I'm terrible at this. When I get the risk question for security, anyone who loves metrics and loves making risk and equations is going to hate my answer. I'm warning you ahead of time. Because I don't know what it is. I can't tell you who North Korea is going to hack tomorrow or why. I've never been able to predict their activities. We got years of it. But the problem with cyber is the asymmetry makes it really weird. If somebody has a 0-day today, where are they going to use it? It just blows off the whole equation. It really does. And so the analogy I've always used, if you have 10 people protecting King Sven of Canada and nobody kills him, you budget cut from 10 people protecting him to 8 people protecting him, and he's just fine. You cut it down to 6 people protecting him, and something bad happens. Someone's going to ask the question, well, what was the right amount of people to protect him? Nobody knows the answer still. I think it's really complex because within the next 18 days, another 0 day is going to pop up. The operator that's got it and found that exploit is going to know what is it worth. If they're working outside of a government entity or work for a criminal entity, they're going to look to sell it. They're going to get it to an operator. God only knows what their objective is, and it depends on what software is impacted by it. So my gut is when it comes to our threat intel folks, we catalog based on attribution. We do assign risk scores as best as possible. I, as a security professional, for whatever reason, I apply my own risk level based on my management's risk tolerance and what industry I'm in. Like if you're in the defense industrial base, you're up against APEX attackers. Just get good and stay good. End of story. It doesn't matter if some security company goes, hey, we're in the green today on DEF CON. I wouldn't buy any of it in cyber domain. Every bullets are flying left and right in the cyber domain. I think the risk is high if you get sloppy right out of the gates. Your risk gets high if you don't do a patch for 24 hours sometimes. Other times your risk isn't high and you haven't patched something for 3 months. Another really long answer that didn't answer your question. For 4 minutes left.
You got politics.
Yeah, I did the thing at the Naval Academy 3 weeks ago. Couldn't answer a question.
Oh, sir. For US-based companies, I'm seeing a large swing of web shells. I was wondering, is it just my experience, or is it still an uptake for you as well?
Yeah, no, I think it's an uptick because of just what are the protocols that can go in and out of networks. 443, let's rip it and roll. You know, when you looked at, when I was talking about the backdoor infrastructure on Fortinet firewalls, it's web shells. There's actually a shell in the interface that you can access via the common secure SSL. So my gut is that's based on the protocols. Unless you have a client-side backdoor popping out, web shells is a great front-end backdoor. Because it's the one thing allowing it. And that was fast. Got that one right. Yeah, we got questions in the back.
One more in the back.
Hi, Kevin. Joseph Schaefer, College of Information and Cyberspace. So based on some of your answers to these questions and your presentation, what do senior leaders need to know about cyber? So I asked this question to several people, but you got to boil it down.
Yeah, I think senior leaders, all senior leaders own risk at their company. It's if you're the top dog, you're CEO, you're sitting on the board, you're in the audit committee, whatever it is. I think the first question you can translate a lot of ways is how good are we at this? Period. How good are we? And the way you get to an answer there, that's a feel-good answer, is you red team your damn networks, period, get unvarnished truth. How good are we? And tabletop exercises, everybody, only 2 hours long, but they're exactly what your organization or company doesn't want to go through. It's the real, oh no, you know, we're Campbell Soup and we can't ship soup now, or we just, whatever the scenario is, you come up with a cyber incident, tabletop it, because what'll happen is leaders will recognize, do they understand it? Are they prepared? Who's communicating? How did we react? Did the engine work? So I think those are the two ways to do it. That translates so many ways to how I get it, because I meet most CISOs and most boards after they've had a breach. When it comes to that one-on-one beer late at night, the CEO is like, how good are we? Why did this even happen? And I have to go, oh, you're up against the SVR. Don't blame your guy, or whatever the situation is. But bottom line, the only way to get an emotional response, and what we do at Mandia is every night, 90 days, we red team our network, and that's about all I care about. Someone can show up with, here's our 5-dimensional GRC report, and, are we compliant? And there's like a bunch of green, and whatever it is. And people have heard me speak, I say this all the time. Whenever anything's in the green at the board, they're happy or they don't believe it. But, the bottom line is you can't have yellows or reds. And so I just go right to red team. How did the red team do? Did they get my email, yes or no? Did they get to customer data, yes or no? If the red team's successful, you have a prioritized list of what you need to do. If the red team's not successful, you actually can feel pretty good. Hey, all right,
Well, Kevin, we're about out of time, but I do have one more person who wanted to talk to you up here. General, if you kind of come up. And it's a big deal. So please, attention to award.
Attention orders for significant contributions to the community of the military cyber professionals and having demonstrated the values of duty, loyalty, and excellence is hereby admitted of the date of May 18th to the Order of Thor, signed Joe Billingsley.
Congratulations.